The Nazi concentration camps were, in essence, a gathering of the most sinister kind of psychopaths who found an outlet for their twisted fantasies by having thousands of helpless prisoners at their complete disposal. People of all kinds in Nazi uniforms could do whatever they pleased. Aside from the regular conditions of imprisonment, which could not even be considered minimally humane under any circumstances, the guards also arranged additional amusements for themselves that still make one's blood run cold today. Perhaps the most horrific of these abuses were those inflicted on young prisoners. When children cried from hunger, the Nazi guards, to avoid being irritated by their tears, simply killed them. Another terrifying amusement was to grab young children by the legs, swing them in the air, and smash their heads against a wall or pole with full force. Many mothers died from the shock, went insane, or became completely deranged after witnessing such atrocities. It was common practice to herd people into a wire-fenced area, take children away from their mothers, and then in front of the parents, grab the children by the legs and smash their heads against the corner of a house. If a child tried to steal something edible during a march or in their free time, the guards and wardens would punish them by whipping or beating them with a club. In one of the children's camps, many prisoners remembered an unidentified German woman, Frau Elsa, who amused herself with the children's constant hunger. As one former prisoner, Pyotr Fyodorovich, recalled, this Frau would come into the camp where the children lay on the bunks, and she would say to the commandant, "This child will go with me." She would start to amuse herself. I remember what happened to me. She stands there holding a cup of milk and teases me with it from a distance. I go to her, hungry, and a German shepherd jumps over me. I tumble, and I don't get to drink that milk. They said that this amused the German woman so much that when one of the little ones stretched out in front of the spilled milk, the dog knocked him to the ground. Frau Elsa elegantly allowed the milk to drain from the ground. In another camp for women and children, the main amusement for the guards was the siren. It could sound at any moment. After the siren, the children had to run to their mothers and then quickly return. If a child did not make it back in time, both the child and the mother were shot. In one of the children's concentration camps in Belarus, the Nazis invented an amusement called the harness. When they got drunk, they would gather the strongest prisoners, harness them to a cart, and then sit and whip them to make them run faster. During these runs, they were often also forced to drink. If someone fell or stumbled, the drunken Hitlerites could beat them to death or shoot them on the spot. Another, possibly the most terrifying amusement of the Nazis was the walk. It is essential to understand that, as a rule, children in concentration camps served as blood, plasma, and skin donors for wounded German soldiers and officers. Naturally, after numerous blood donations, the children quickly became weak, and there came a point when even the German executioners in white coats realized that nothing more could be taken from the child. But like any person, the children wanted to survive and live. So they often asked the aunties and uncles, doctors, not to send them to the gas chamber, but to give them a chance to regain their strength and be useful again. Very often, the aunties and uncles granted this request, giving the doomed child a chance to take a walk to rest a little. But the walk was only allowed in a strictly defined direction. For example, in the Salaspils concentration camp, it was a lawn covered with green grass that, in essence, masked the furnace of the crematorium where the fire constantly burned. When a child walked on this lawn, at some point, they would fall through into the roaring flames. This joke terribly amused the executioners in white coats. The list of sadistic amusements the Nazis had for adult prisoners is also practically endless. The most harmless was when the guards chose several people they didn't like, ordered them to lie down and crawl, and the command had to be executed immediately, or else they would be brutally beaten to death or shot. The prisoners would fall and crawl through water, broken glass, manure, or stones, while the guards standing nearby laughed, often even filming the scene. In the Koldichevo concentration camp in the Baranovichi region of Belarus, prisoners sentenced to death were forced to perform a peculiar ritual before their execution, which greatly amused the guards. For example, according to the memories of surviving female prisoners at the famous Koldichevo Oak, where no less than 1,000 people were hanged, the nooses were always ready. The condemned were forced to shout loudly during the day about why they were sentenced to death. Yermakovich remembered a 16-year-old boy who stood by the oak and shouted loudly, "I ran away, they caught me." When the boy stopped shouting and began to whisper, the guards beat him with clubs until he started shouting loudly again. When the guards had had their fun, they hanged the unfortunate boy, and his body was left hanging for several days as a warning to the others. Today we know of hundreds of other amusements that Nazi guards and wardens had, such as some of them making lampshades and leather goods from tattooed human skin. This was a hobby of the notoriously infamous Frau Ilse Koch. Some Nazi craftsmen even set up furniture production from human bones in their free time. Irma Grisi, one of the most feared female executioners, deliberately starved her dogs for several days and then set them on the prisoners for amusement, laughing as she watched the hungry animals tear the unfortunate prisoners to pieces. Maria Mandel, another Nazi female devil, organized an orchestra of female prisoners who greeted new arrivals to the camp with bravura music. In the Jewish ghettos, one of the most popular amusements for the guards was the so-called raids. Drunk Hitlerites would burst into the barracks, using flashlights to choose the girls they liked the most, and often rape them on the spot. If it turned out that a girl was a virgin, the guards would call for their colleagues to come and enjoy the fresh meat. As for the prisoners of war, the scope for abuse was simply monstrous. According to official data, prisoners of war in concentration camps were deliberately starved for several days and then thrown into an area with dead animals, which amused the Hitlerites. Prisoners of war were also used for an even more horrific amusement. Stripped to their underwear, emaciated prisoners were forced to run barefoot through a minefield. The Hitlerites made bets on which runner would win the competition by running the most. Boxing and sports teams were, on the one hand, monstrous amusements, and on the other, surprisingly, they became a symbol of the prisoners' resistance to the Nazis. The guards of the concentration camps, in order to hone their hand-to-hand combat skills, selected the strongest prisoners for so-called boxing matches. This amusement became so popular that even Hitler personally approved of it. The main idea of these fights was to demonstrate the superiority of the Aryans over the non-Aryans. However, even a victory over a weakened and hungry prisoner could not be considered outstanding. Nevertheless, quite often professional Nazi boxers faced professional wrestlers, boxers, and athletes who not only did not lose but also defeated the guards. Later, the Nazis transformed the idea of these fights into tournaments between prisoners from different teams, which the Hitlerites formed themselves. Victory in a fight meant life, and defeat meant the gas chamber. It should be noted that the guards provided their athletes with an enhanced ration so that the prisoner could last as many fights as possible. However, even victory did not guarantee life, as the camp authorities, enraged by the invincibility of the athlete, often simply ordered his elimination. In essence, any amusement at the expense of the prisoners always contained the possibility of death, regardless of whether the guards were satisfied or not. This is because, despite the fig leaf of labor and correctional camps, concentration camps were initially intended only for the mass extermination of people,